The war between Caesar and Pompey had been going on for a year. In the west, Caesar pulled off a brilliant campaign, taking control of Spain and the key port city of Massilia with barely a fight. But the legates he sent out on other missions did not have the same luck. Curio, leading 4 legions, managed to secure Sicily, but when he crossed into North Africa, he was defeated by the combined forces of the Pompeians and the Numidian king Juba. Curio was killed, and nearly his entire army was lost. Gaius Antonius, whom Caesar had tasked with holding the mountain passes in Illyria, ran into trouble from the start. After suffering mass desertions, he ended up surrounded and was forced to surrender. Whatever was left of his troops ended up joining Pompey's army. For a whole year, Pompey's main forces had stayed out of the fighting. According to Caesar's estimates, Pompey used that time to raise 9 full legions, bringing his total to 18. Caesar, meanwhile, had only 11 legions, and even those weren't at full strength. Pompey had also built a solid logistics network. He'd pulled together fleets from across Asia and ordered the construction of many new ships. His navy controlled the Adriatic Sea, and his land forces held the mountain passes of Illyria. Despite his earlier successes, Caesar now found himself in a tight spot. The territories under his control, Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia, were constantly under threat from North Africa. He needed to act quickly and decisively. Pompey's main headquarters and supply base were in Dyrrachium. He himself was in Thessalonica, while his troops were stationed in Piraeus. He planned to settle his forces for the winter in Dyrrachium, Apollonia, and other coastal cities to prevent Caesar from landing in Greece. But he wasn't expecting Caesar to make a move anytime soon. The storm season had already begun. Pompey's main fleet, over 110 warships strong, was anchored at Corcyra under the command of Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus. Only a small patrol squadron of 18 ships, led by Decimus Laelius, watched the coast. Caesar gathered 11 legions and all of the cavalry he could find at Brundisium. There were only enough ships to carry about half of his army. Still, he decided to make the crossing. In January of 48 BC, his fleet slipped past Pompey's patrols and landed 6 legions, about 20,000 infantry and 600 cavalry, on the far side of the Adriatic. Caesar immediately sent the ships back to bring over the rest. Bibulus, furious that he'd let Caesar get through, was ready this time. He intercepted the returning fleet on its way back to Brundisium and destroyed every ship. Caesar was now cut off from Rome, surrounded by enemy territory. Pompey was in Condavia, on the road to Macedonia to Apollonia and Dyrrachium, when he got word of Caesar's landing. Alarmed, he pushed his army into a forced march, aiming to secure the key coastal cities, especially Dyrrachium, which held the main stockpiles of food and military supplies. After taking Apollonia, Caesar also headed toward Dyrrachium, but Pompey's troops marched day and night without stopping and got there first. Seeing that Pompey had reached Dyrrachium and had a clear numerical advantage, Caesar pulled back across the Apsis River to Apollonia to protect the towns and villages that had declared for him. Pompey followed close behind. The confrontation between the opposing sides took place at the Apsis River. Clashes between the vanguard units of both armies occurred near the bridge over the river, but neither side managed to secure control of the bridge, and eventually it was destroyed. The armies camped on opposite sides of the river. Both commanders decided to stay put for the winter. Caesar hoped that the rest of his legions would manage to cross over in the meantime. Pompey, for his part, was bringing in reinforcements of his own. At that point, Caesar had about 30,000 men, while Pompey had twice as many. Getting Caesar's remaining troops across the Adriatic was nearly impossible. Pompey's navy, led by Bibulus, kept a tight grip on the sea routes. But Caesar's forces controlled the coastline, cutting the fleet off from safe harbors and fresh water. The water shortage became so bad that sailors were collecting dew from the sails. Bibulus tried to negotiate a truce with Caesar, but Caesar made one demand: let his legions in Brundisium cross the sea. Bibulus refused, and not long after he fell ill and died. With his death, the fleet lost unified command, and now each squadron operated under its own admiral. One of Pompey's commanders, Libo, took a squadron of 50 ships and sailed to Brundisium, figuring it was easier to control a single location than spread his forces thin across the whole coastline. He occupied an island just off the coast and blockaded Caesar's fleet, which was anchored in the harbor. At the time, Mark Antony was in charge of Caesar's forces in Brundisium. He ordered regular patrols along the coast to stop Libo's sailors from landing to collect supplies or fresh water. The island Libo had chosen had no reliable source of water, and with no support from other squadrons and no way to resupply, he was eventually forced to retreat. Months went by. The standoff between the two armies continued, with Caesar and Pompey camped on opposite sides of the river. Caesar sent multiple envoys offering a truce, but Pompey refused to engage. Caesar's position was growing more desperate. Even though his army was smaller, it was his men who began to feel the food shortages first. Spring was still weeks away, the harvest was far off, and the surrounding countryside had been already stripped bare by both sides. Pompey, for his part, wasn't eager to risk an open battle. He didn't fully trust the legions he had raised from new recruits. With Dyrrachium well stocked, he preferred to wait it out, hoping that starvation would eventually force Caesar to surrender. Finally, Antony made his move. He loaded 3 legions, who were all veteran soldiers from Caesar's Gallic campaigns, onto ships and set out to reinforce Caesar. But with Pompey's navy both controlling and patrolling the coast, there was no safe port to land in. Antony was forced to sail further down the coastline and eventually came ashore at the harbor of Nymphaeum, near the island of Issa. As soon as news of Antony's landing reached them, both commanders sprang into action. Pompey was determined to stop him from joining forces with Caesar and hoped to defeat them separately. Caesar, meanwhile, set out on a rapid march to link up with Antony as soon as possible. Pompey had the advantage. Unlike Caesar, he didn't have to cross the deep and fast-flowing Apsis River. Both armies moved at the same time, but even with a detour to find a crossing, Caesar's troops moved faster since they weren't slowed down by a baggage train. Warned by scouts that Pompey was on his way, Antony ordered his men to build a fortified camp. With Caesar's army now at his back, Pompey didn't risk an assault on a well-defended position. The very next day, Caesar arrived and joined forces with Antony. Now it was Pompey who found himself at risk. If he stayed where he was, the combined armies of Caesar and Antony could cut him off from his main supply base at Dyrrachium. He had no choice but to pull back and set up camp near the town of Asparagium, not far from Dyrrachium, on more favorable ground. Meanwhile, in Asia, Pompey's ally Scipio received word of Caesar's landing in Epirus. Pompey ordered him to bring his forces and join the main army. Scipio moved quickly, gathering his legions and marching through Macedonia toward Epirus. With nearly the entire Pompeian army now concentrated and the Greek coast no longer strategically important, Caesar withdrew the legion he had left at Oricum and began a series of coordinated maneuvers. He dispatched part of his troops to the provinces in order to assert and secure control over them. Cassius Longinus was sent to Thessaly with a legion of fresh recruits. Sabinus, with 5 cohorts and a cavalry unit, was dispatched to Aetolia. And Gnaeus Domitius Calvinus, commanding 2 legions, was sent to Macedonia to intercept Scipio's advance. After Caesar's forces pulled out of Oricum, the city was attacked by a flotilla led by Pompey's son. He couldn't take the city, but his ships managed to enter the harbor and burn what was left of Caesar's small naval force. With Oricum under siege, Caesar's supply lines from the southern cities were cut off. Pompey's son then targeted the Isle of Issa, another stronghold held by Caesar's allies. He failed to capture it as well, but sank a number of merchant ships that had been delivering supplies to Caesar's army. These raids seriously worsened Caesar's position. At that point, he had between 35,000 and 40,000 infantry and around 3,000 cavalry. Pompey, by contrast, commanded 53,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Caesar marched towards Pompey's camp near Asparagium, hoping to force a battle. But Pompey refused to come out and fight, so Caesar turned toward Dyrrachium, trying to lure him out into the open. Pompey followed, and both armies arrived at Dyrrachium around the same time. Caesar set up camp right outside the city, while Pompey took position on high coastal hills nearby. Both sides began digging in. Caesar ordered a network of trenches and redoubts built to surround Pompey's camp. Pompey in turn fortified his position to guard against a sudden assault. Caesar repeatedly drew up his forces in battle formation, trying to provoke a fight. Pompey did the same, but kept his troops close to camp, well within range of his siege engines stationed along the walls. Under those conditions, Caesar couldn't risk launching an attack. Although he was technically surrounded, Pompey had no trouble keeping his army supplied. Everything that they needed came in by sea, which was still controlled by the Pompeian fleet. Pompey's army began to feel the strain as water grew scarce, and Caesar's troops had diverted or dammed the rivers and streams that flowed through the blockaded territory. There was also a growing shortage of forage for the horses and pack animals, forcing the Pompeians to dig wells just to get by. At the same time, Caesar's own men were running low on food. The surrounding land had been picked clean, and conditions got so bad that the soldiers were eating a kind of porridge made from boiled roots. To deal with the crisis, Caesar sent Cassius Longinus and Calvisius Sabinus to take control of Achaia and set up a supply line to bring grain to the army. It was around this time that a group of deserters from Caesar's side brought Pompey a crucial piece of intelligence. They pointed out a weak spot in Caesar's defenses, an unfinished section on the southern end of the line near the sea. In that area, Caesar's men had built two separate walls, one facing Pompey's encircled forces, the other facing the coast to guard against a naval landing. Between them sat an old abandoned camp once used by Caesar's troops. It was far from the main camp, lightly defended, and looked like a good place to strike. The deserters also revealed to Pompey the timing of guard shifts and patrols in that section of Caesar's defenses. Pompey decided to launch a surprise attack in an attempt to break the siege. His main goal was to open a way for his cavalry and re-establish access to water and forage. He assigned 60 cohorts, roughly half of his army, to the mission. That night, Pompeian forces launched a coordinated attack on the vulnerable section. Using ships, Pompey landed troops between the two walls and farther down the coast, while the other units moved out from his main defenses. The assault came from three directions at once: from the rear, the front, and the flank. The only troops guarding the area were a few cohorts of Caesar's 9th Legion. Outnumbered and caught off guard, they had no choice but to fall back. The Pompeians pressed their advantage. Encouraged by their early success, they launched a fresh assault. Caesar's retreat quickly turned into a full-blown rout, and panic spread even to the reinforcements he had sent to stabilize the situation. The retreat was finally stopped at the nearest of Caesar's camps, where Mark Antony managed to restore order. Not long after, Caesar arrived to take command himself. Pompey wasted no time. He sent part of his forces to occupy the abandoned camp and assigned the rest to begin building a new line of fortifications beyond the breach in Caesar's defenses. To contain the breakout and turn the tide, Caesar committed 33 cohorts, the majority of his army. His goal was to retake the old camp and cut the link between Pompey's main camp and the newly constructed defenses. He split his forces in two. The left wing was to launch a direct assault on the camp, aiming to overwhelm or at least pin down as many of Pompey's troops as possible. Meanwhile, the right wing would swing around the camp and bypass the defensive lines and strike from the rear. At first, everything went according to plan. The left wing attacked the camp head-on and after brutal fighting, managed to break through and push inside. But on the right flank, things didn't go as smoothly. Caesar's men ran into an unexpected obstacle, a solid defensive wall that connected the camp to the river. The only way through was a narrow gap near the riverbank, which slowed their advance to a crawl. Pompey saw his chance. He pulled most of his troops working on the new fortifications, reinforced them with his reserves, and launched a sharp counterattack right as Caesar's right wing was trying to force its way through the bottleneck. When Pompey's troops came into view, Caesar's right wing, still struggling to get through the narrow gap in the wall, couldn't form up in time. They panicked and began retreating through the same tight passage that they had just come through. The bottleneck, combined with the steep slopes of the embankment, caused a crushing jam that only worsened the chaos. Inside the camp, the Pompeian soldiers saw their reinforcements arriving. Encouraged, they launched a counterattack. On Caesar's left flank, the sight of the right wing fleeing in panic sparked their own collapse. What started as an organized assault turned into a full-blown rout. Caesar's entire army was now in retreat. He rushed to stop the panic, but his troops were too far gone to listen. One standard-bearer even tried to strike him with the pointed end of his legion's standard. Caesar was only saved by the quick action of his bodyguards. Pompey had a golden opportunity to finish Caesar off. With the enemy in full-blown retreat and total disarray, a decisive attack could have ended the war. But unexpectedly, he called off the pursuit. It's possible he suspected a trap and didn't want to risk falling into an ambush. Caesar lost more than 4,000 men in the battle. Pompey's losses were minimal. The blockade had been broken. In the days that followed, Caesar managed to pull his army back together and restore order. With supplies running low, he decided to march to Thessaly, hoping to restock his provisions there. Pompey now had several paths forward. He could have marched through Illyria into Italy or crossed the sea, still under his firm control. But confident in his advantage, he chose instead to pursue Caesar, determined to bring the civil war to a final, decisive end. Once again, if you've made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. We have a whole team behind this, and we really love seeing you follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations. We put out new content every single week. If you'd like to support the channel and help us make more videos like this, consider joining us on Patreon. You'll get early access to new episodes, work-in-progress updates, and more. Every bit of support goes a really long way. Thank you. You can also leave a super thanks down below if you'd like to give us a little extra boost. It really means a lot and helps us keep going. We hope to see you next time.